Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, Perfect Building Maintenance, M&T Bank, Customers Bank, Marks Paneth LLP, Capital One Bank, Collins Building Services, Meridian Capital Group. Additional support has been provided by grants from AKA Hotel Residences Corman Communities, Ariel Property Advisors, Amarant Bank, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, Chase Commercial Mortgage Lending, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Citizens Bank, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties LLC, Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Casamatides Red Apple Group, Keysight Capital Partners, Matone Group, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Ocean First Bank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Services, Stonehenge NYC, SVN CPEX Real Estate Services, TerraCRG, the Meringer Family Foundation, and these friends. Brooklyn, a place where I grew up, a place that so much action. So today I have an individual who came to Brooklyn via Jerusalem, and who's become a very prominent individual as a leader, as the founder and CEO of TerraCRG, Ofer Cohen. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me about the history. I was saying Jerusalem. Tell me about the family in Jerusalem. Going back to your great-grandfather and then your grandfather, because your grandfather really helped you get involved, surprisingly, in the real estate.
So my father was born in Jerusalem to a very poor family. His grandparents were both from Iran. His parents, my grandparents, were born in Jerusalem. He was the youngest of six. And when he was 2 years old, his dad left to Colombia, South America.
Right, you said he went to Bogota.
Yeah, he went to Bogota. And subsequently, actually, for my dad's 80th birthday 6 years ago, we went to visit his grave. That was really kind of an interesting experience. But yeah, I mean, so my dad was 2 years old when his dad moved on.
Yeah, now what did he do when he went to Bogota, your grandfather?
So there's no direct reporting on what he did, but what we do know is that at some point when he became a little bit more well off, he started sending money.
Right, you said he sent clothing with gold coins.
Yeah, he was putting the coins inside of the clothing. You know, at that point, you know, this is like the 1940s, the 1950s. He ended up, I think he passed away in 1956 or something like that in Bogota.
But he never came back.
He never really came back. He came to visit right before my dad went to the army, when Dad was 18.
But your grandmother was still...
Yeah, so my grandmother raised 6 kids on her own, and at some point he sent enough money to buy a big, nice building in a good part.
Right, which is your entrance into real estate, right?
This was my entrance to real estate.
Right, so it was a building with what, 8 apartments, you said?
I think it's like 6 or 8 apartments. It was a really nice part of Jerusalem.
Okay, and there were 6 siblings in total, your father and 5 siblings.
Right.
So each one would inherit
Yes.
1 apartment.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's where I grew up. That's the house where I grew up, and actually that's where my parents still live. So.
Now tell me about who was the individual who worked on the roads, the pipelines?
So my grandfather on my mom's side, he was born in Turkey, Izmir, Turkey, which is sort of like close to Greece. And he immigrated to Israel, and he was an electrician. He was a Sephardic Jew, But in order to get a job in Tel Aviv, back in the day, you had to pretend you're Ashkenazi. So the cool story is that his last name was Monaji. I guess it's a Turkish Jewish name or whatever, and he changed it to Monajinsky. Then he landed this job, and he ended up being the electrician who laid out all the lines of. But the first electricity line is up Tel Aviv.
So this is your mother's father.
Yeah.
So tell me about your mother.
Yeah. So my mom grew up in Tel Aviv.
Okay, she grew up in Tel Aviv. Dad grew up in Jerusalem. And mom's became a nurse, right?
Yeah, and then in nursing school, she went to nursing school with my aunt, my father's sister, and she introduced them at some point.
Okay. So now let's talk about you. You were born when?
1971.
Okay, in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So what was Jerusalem like growing up as a kid? Before we're going to go from the early days until the army.
Yeah, I mean, so I think in a lot of ways, Jerusalem was just like any other city. It's a relatively big city, but we lived in a very nice. Back then, wasn't a wealthy neighborhood. We were only there by luck because my grandfather had the building. Sent the money to buy the building. Otherwise, we would have lived in a much less kind of well-off neighborhood. But growing up in Jerusalem was nice. You could, after school, when you're in high school, after school, you can just literally walk to the old city and just walk around. I mean, it was a nice experience. I mean, you do have a lot of sort of Mideast tension over the years and wars and things.
Your father fought in 3 wars, you said?
My father was in 3 wars. And when I grew up, was sort of through the Intifadas, the first, the second. And when I was in the army, it was the first Gulf War, I guess. So, I mean, there's always something going on in Israel.
So when you were growing up, what were you thinking of doing? I mean, there was no idea of real estate.
My first, so I was always kind of entrepreneurial, but I was always very creative. I studied art and design starting in high school. My first business actually was when I was 12. Me and a good friend of mine, we had a car wash business in the neighborhood. It was a great business because we took all the money that people paid us, but our parents paid for the expenses. So it was kind of like really cool. And so I was pretty much into music, art, and design. I was really on the creative side. Real estate, or really business for that matter, wasn't any priority for me.
Okay, so you graduated high school what year? 88?
Yeah, 88, 89.
Okay, and then you said to me, what you do for the 1 year before you went to the army?
It wasn't really a 1 year. It was a kind of a 4, 5, 6 months break. Traveled a little bit. Then I went to the army.
So talk to me about the 3 years, because you had an interesting army experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think people, it's funny. I actually did not fight in any war. I had the luxury of.
You didn't see combat?
I did not see combat. I was heading a creative services division in sort of what, in layman's term, like the training or educational kind of division of the army, where you train soldiers.
What were you training them?
So different things. I mean, so
radio? Or?
No, I mean, so this is more a little bit more aspirational. I mean, there's a lot of 2 different kinds of soldiers. One type of soldiers that maybe didn't graduate from high school and need to kind of get a little bit more.
So like a high school preparation for a GED type of program.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And then the other one was Hebrew for kids that grew up in other places. I mean, when I joined the army, it was right after big immigration from Ethiopia, actually. People would join the army without knowing that much Hebrew or anything about the culture of Israel.
So you spent 3 years in the army?
Mm-hmm.
So now what happens?
So now...
you like this marketing,
I like marketing, I like the music, I like creative. I was looking for a job in graphic design. I joined a record label in Tel Aviv. I moved to Tel Aviv full time.
When did you move to Tel Aviv?
93.
Okay.
Yeah, at the end of the army, 93.
Why Tel Aviv? More entrepreneur, more.
Yeah, Tel Aviv had sort of like Tel Aviv is a real city. I mean, Jerusalem was a big city in terms of population, but from a industry and media or even finance, it wasn't as developed, right? So if you wanted to be exposed to like a lot of different things, you have to be in Tel Aviv.
So how'd you get a job in the media business?
You know, I had a lot of, just because I was doing a lot of work in the Army and I was running this creative services division and I had a lot of exposure and a lot of training, I guess, I was a good candidate and I just went to talk to them and, you know, Tel Aviv is a relatively small town. And that job kind of evolved. I became the creative director there. They made me a partner. And then in
This is the
end
record
of 95, yeah, in 1995. So it was fun. I mean, we did a lot of, you know, great things. We did all the creative work for all these different artists. And then at the end of 95, I decided to move to New York. And 96, I moved.
We'll get to New York. But you said to me, was that when you were involved with Napster, the streaming?
When I moved here, yeah.
Okay, so it's 1995.
Not Napster, but yes.
Okay, 1995. When you come over here, had you ever been to New York? Had you ever been to the
Yeah,
US?
I've been to New York once for like a month, right, maybe a couple of years earlier.
You moved to New York without a job.
Right.
Okay, where'd you live originally?
I moved to New York with this idea that maybe I could potentially do something with a company in Israel and do some kind of a partnership with them in New York. But at the end of the day, I mean, I just moved here with my portfolio and I was knocking on doors. I moved into a rent control apartment in Soho on McDougal Street, McDougal just off of Prince. And
Did you have any relatives here?
I have a family that is still here, yes.
So you didn't move into the family?
No.
Okay, so how'd you get a job?
So
I mean, you were peddling your
yeah, so I
portfolios?
was trying to, I mean, it took a few months. I was going to meetings and trying to pitch myself to these different record labels. I actually scored a freelance gig at Def Jam Records for like a couple of days, and then I realized that this is a little bit kind of counterintuitive, and I wanted to create a little bit more of a competitive edge for myself. The internet just started. This is 1996, and it was this new thing that was very exciting, but nobody knew anything about it. And I started seeing ads for people that are looking for people that know how to build websites, but nobody knew how to build websites because there was just like the first few websites. So I just basically taught myself HTML and created a website, and with my portfolio and my resume and things. And
So the website was your
Yeah.
was your portfolio.
yeah, and I saw all these ads, and there was a startup company, one of the few startups that happened to be an internet music startup. So that was kind of perfect to have background in creative and marketing and music.
What do you mean by internet music?
So this was the first
The streaming?
yeah, one of the first companies that really try to bring music to the internet. The name of the company was SonicNet. It subsequently got acquired by MTV in 1999.
1999, and then what happens?
And then I said to myself, well, if I'm so smart, and the company that I work for and I created all these things with, at this point I had like a team of 15. If I'm so smart, and
I'll
maybe
go out on my own.
Maybe I can go on my own and start my own startup.
Okay, but as a marketing company, or as creative company?
No,
or
so
a web company?
so I didn't want to be in the services business. I kind of got fed up with it, and the design and creative services, and I kind of didn't want to be on that side of things, and I just want to develop my own product. And there were a bunch of different iterations of it, but one of the last iterations of the product was some kind of like a web-based platform for video, for sharing, for uploading and sharing video. Now it sounds obvious and idiotic, but this is
So it was before-
99, 2000,
before
YouTube, before anything, before people actually believed that video on the internet would be kind of a thing. So I ran with it for about a year and a half, raised some money, and then the dot-com bubble kind of crashed. It was hard to raise more funding. I realized I didn't really know what I was doing.
So is this when you go into the consulting business with a
Yeah.
friend?
And at that point, I partnered with two other actually Israeli guys, and we created an advisory firm that essentially helps Israeli startups move to New York. And we worked with a lot of very interesting products and services and a lot of entrepreneurs and companies that kind of needed access to the U.S. market.
So what were you providing to them?
So we were essentially some kind of a hybrid between a marketing and business development team, like an outsourced marketing and business development team for them in the New York market.
Okay.
So we would become their face in New York, and we would work with like 5 to 10 companies at a time.
So you created the sales force for them?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Created the first, whatever the product was, the first installation, the first sale, the first...
Okay, but what type of companies were they?
I mean, there were technology companies, software companies, media services companies. It was a lot of actually very interesting kind of collection of services. But it was an interesting period, and it was also an interesting work because you get to work with a lot of different.
You meet interesting people.
You meet interesting people, and you learn a lot about industries, and you.
Now, did you have to go back to Tel Aviv?
Not as much. Not as much. One of my partners was more going back and forth a little bit more, and I was more focused here. So one day, we had twin girls in 2004. In anticipation for that, so there was kind of an interesting period. There was 2001. There was September 11th. There was this whole period of what the hell are we doing? Back then, raising venture capital in New York was not as available or easy as it is today. Realized that consulting business could have been great as a venture capital business. If we had equity in all these different companies, that would be a great run. But as a consulting, as a fee business, it wasn't as interesting. It wasn't real. There was not that much trajectory. So I sat down with a good friend of mine, Corey, at my house at that point, and we said, what should we do? And we said, why don't we buy a building? And then we went to Bushwick and we bought our first building.
Now, so when was your entree to Brooklyn, being only Brooklyn?
So really, 2004 was kind of a pivotal year.
Had you gone to Brooklyn?
Quite honestly, my familiarity with Brooklyn was not, extensive at that point, but started going back and forth to Brooklyn to look at real estate in 2003. 2004, decided to move to Brooklyn, bought a house in Prospect Heights, and then bought our first building in Bushwick, and kind of fell in love with it and kind of saw something that I was looking for, which was
but at this time you were not a real estate broker.
No.
You were more of an
entrepreneur.
An entrepreneur who was phasing yourself out of the other business, right?
Right.
With 2 kids.
Right.
A house.
Right.
And another house that you bought with your buddy.
That's right. And something in the energy of Brooklyn kind of really got me excited. And going through the experience of buying the first building, realized that kind of want to buy a lot of buildings. But then again, I didn't have that much access to capital, but I also realized I'm a little bit of a deal junkie and I want to do a lot of deals. And I said, by the time I raise money and I buy another building and these are small buildings and each building is $700,000. I just decided the best way to learn the business is to become a broker. And I said, this is a great way. I have a lot of marketing background. I have sales experience. I'm in Brooklyn.
Yeah, but you know nothing about the real estate market.
I know nothing about the real estate market.
Right. Okay. So this is 2005?
2004, and then 2005 became a broker.
Okay. You become a broker, and then you have this experience with Paul Massey of Massey Knackle. What happened?
Paul and Bob had a really nice platform, and they had their office in Brooklyn started to get really, really busy. Back then it was in Bay Ridge. And as I was walking around Bushwick, I kept seeing the Massey Knackle signs. And so I went to meet with Paul and some of the partners, and Paul was not that excited about hiring me. He kind of,
But he didn't like the Israeli marketer?
I don't know. I mean, I kind of felt like maybe he thought, maybe he thought I was a little bit too entrepreneurial. Um, and anyway, by the second meeting, I convinced him to hire me. And I worked under Paul and Tim King and some of, other great guys that became really close friends over the years for 2.5 years.
And then the deal junkie decides to go out on your own?
Yeah, and then I realized that I want to go back to being an entrepreneur. I kind of got a sense a little bit of what real estate brokerage was for 2 years. I had a little territory in Sunset Park. We did a lot of industrial sales. After a couple of years, I had a 25% market share in a little market. And again, I was like, if I'm so smart, why should I work for someone else? I should work for myself. But really, the vision.
So what's the first date? When do you open up TerraCRG?
The beginning
and
of
and as I asked
12
you before,
years ago. Yeah.
Why do you call it TerraCRG?
So, so the end of 2007, I decided to start a company. I started a company with, back then, my associate, Melissa DeBella. Her name right now is Melissa Warren. And one day I came to her, I said, listen, we're going to start a company. Why don't you look for an office space for us? And she said, okay. And we kind of sort of did it. And beginning of January of 2008, nobody knew that Lehman Brothers was going to crash 10 months later. We just launched our company. I called it TerraCRG. I named it TerraCRG. I mean, I didn't want to name it after myself. I wanted to have a name that is a slightly more generic, but not too simple, that other people can affiliate with. Terra means land in Latin. CRG means Commercial Realty Group. And kind of sort of happened. The logo is the map of Brooklyn.
So where in January of 2008 is this headquarters?
It was in Sunset Park. It was just kind of simple for us because we had a lot of these relationships, and one of our clients gave us some space on the second floor of a garage building that he owned. And he kind of gave us a very affordable space, and that's where we were for about a year. During this year, subprime market collapsed, Lehman Brothers collapsed, and
the Merrill Lynch collapsed.
And I remember getting calls from a lot of different friends, including you and including Paul, and saying, are you sure you want to continue to do this? This is maybe not the right time to be on your own. But we kept on going, and the 2009 to 2010, some portion of 2011 was, essentially where we cut our teeth on the market. And
when did you make the commitment to yourself that you were going to only be in only Brooklyn?
From the very beginning. I felt the Brooklyn market's going to go through a very strong trajectory, and I felt like whoever's going to affiliate themselves with that stock is going to become like a tracking stock for a very hot stock that's going to run up. I didn't know that the market's going to crash with a global recession, and I didn't know that the market's going to run up after the recession the way he did in Brooklyn. But I felt like over a period of 15 years, it's something that's probably really good to own.
So you started with Melissa and yourself, and where are you today?
35 people, probably.
Okay. And let's talk about certain things that you're involved with. Besides Only Brooklyn, each year you run an event called Only Brooklyn. Tell me about that.
Yeah, 10 years ago, actually this year, it's going to be the 10th anniversary. We started this 10 years ago. Initially, it was sort of like a forum, a relatively small forum to get people to be familiar with what the Brooklyn real estate market is. And as the market grew and we grew, the conference grew. So now it's a conference that we hold in downtown Brooklyn every year, usually in the spring. It's 500 people. It's a full day conference that really speaks about not just where the market was, but where sort of like the leaders of the market think the market is going.
Okay, then what about the podcast? When did you start that?
Started about 2 years ago. I'm having a lot of fun with it.
It's called Hello BK?
Hey BK.
Hey BK.
Hey BK. And it's the podcast about the people behind the Brooklyn transformation. And it's a show that basically I'm interviewing people that were really kind of influential in the trajectory of Brooklyn. Not just pure real estate.
Businesses.
Business and civic as well.
Okay, and let's talk, speaking about the civic, You're very proud of certain affiliations. Downtown Brooklyn Partnership?
Yeah, so I'm the chair of the board of the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, which is essentially, it's an organization that started, I guess, 15 years ago to really help continue to develop downtown Brooklyn in the direction that we needed to go. So initially it was the rezoning and the residential development, and then retail, and now it's office and bringing businesses to downtown Brooklyn. And it's really a consortium of...
The Navy Yard? Talk about that.
Yeah, and the Navy Yard, I believe I joined the Navy Yard board 3 years ago. It's one of the most fun board meetings to go to. It's very, very exciting what's happening in the Navy Yard over the last few years, and I kind of joined it in an important time.
And then the Chamber of Commerce?
Yeah, and I'm still very involved in the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, and I've been the co-chair of the real estate committee of that. Let's
talk about the girls. Tell me about them, the love of your life.
Yeah, so I have 2 girls, twin girls. They're just turned 15.
Their names?
Daya and Ocean. Yeah. What can I tell you? High school.
They're high school. That's great.
Yeah.
For somebody who is a graphic arts person, you've changed quite a bit, and you have become my favorite friend from Only Brooklyn. Thanks for being here again.
Thank you, Michael.